All right. Welcome back to it, ladies and gentlemen. So, this is week number 3 of our Trimble Forensics plus SketchUp live series. So, if you missed the last 2 weeks, we highly encourage you to go back and check them out on our social media platforms. This broadcast is live across YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn, and it's also being recorded. So, feel free and go back and watch the last 2 weeks. Now, without further ado, we've been building up to this week, right? We've been building the hype up, and we really don't need to build up much hype, really, because his work speaks for itself. However, this is the week we have a very special guest on the live stream, Joshua Cohen with Fat Pencil Studio. Joshua, let me unmute you here, and we will transition right over. Joshua, good morning.
Good morning, Chris. How you doing?
Doing well here. Let me just get 1 second here. I've got a little bit of an audio loop. All right. Hopefully we don't have an audio loop coming, or hopefully we don't have an echo anyway.
Yeah, sounds good to me on my end.
All right. Sounds good. With that, welcome. Thank you very much for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do? What is Fat Pencil Studio, and what do you do?
Absolutely. And if it's okay, I will jump into a screen share just to include a little bit of information along with the remarks. So let's see if we can get that going here.
Sounds good.
All right. So let me just start by introducing myself. I have a background in engineering and architecture. And so sometimes people will ask me, how the heck did you get into drawing crime scenes? It's a very unusual transition. And the opportunity actually came back in 2009. It was about 5 years after I started Fat Pencil Studio. And up to that point, I primarily worked with real estate developers, making renderings of buildings and whatnot. But I had an opportunity with a contact who had been hired to work as an expert witness on an eminent domain case. And these are condemnations, they're real estate matters. They don't often go to trial, but in this case, it did go to trial. And you can see on screen this little spreadsheet. My client was going to testify and didn't think the jury would find his spreadsheets explaining the valuation of buildings particularly interesting. So he asked me for some help to sort of visualize different scenarios that they were looking at for massing of buildings and how that affected the valuation. We did a crude little rendering using some Google Earth background, which was pretty sparse at that time. But it was interesting. We put together trial exhibits in about 6 weeks. And then he introduced me to his clients at the city of Portland, and they were in the middle of defending a civil rights case. And this one, they brought us in because they were interested in what different witnesses could see from different perspectives. And you can see here we've got a photograph taken by a bystander. Interestingly enough, in 2009, this was like the only photograph that was taken of this incident that happened on a sunny afternoon, a nice warm afternoon in September in downtown Portland. Today there probably would be 20 or 30 people filming it on their high resolution cell phones. But anyway, we had this image. We built a digital 3D model and matched it to kind of get a sense for where people were at the moment of the incident, and then created this 3D model, which I'm going to show you now what that looks like. And the idea was to use this model in federal court to figure out what witnesses could see at different points. They have a touch screen at the witness stand. We could ask a particular witness, hey, what could you see from where you were standing? Show us where you're standing. Oh, I was on the stairs. We can put them on the stairs and look around to see what they could see from that vantage point. And in fact, it worked really well when we tested it, but then they settled the case a couple days before jury selection started. What really opened my eyes to the usefulness of this approach, though, was that we ended up being able to use this model with a whole bunch of different stakeholders in the case. So some of the witnesses that were friendly to our client, some of the risk adjustment people, other parties that were in the lawsuit, And it really helped give everyone a sense for what were the key issues, how do they need to tell the story, how could they get on the same page about what they needed to do for their case strategy.
Joshua, you know what I really love about that? It is clear and concise, right? It is just incredibly clear. How one of the things with your company is visual stories or visual storytelling. A lot of times the photos and the videos, things can get lost in the weeds, right? One of the things I just love is being able to focus the eye, being able to focus on what's important there. That really, really cool.
Thanks. So today, fast forward 15 years, Fat Pencil Studio is a design firm. We're located in Portland, Oregon, and we use visual tools to help attorneys make a better case. And we have 9 people on staff. They have a background in art, film, architecture, construction, and we've worked on over 700 different cases, both for plaintiff and for defense. So on the civil side, we do anything from personal injury to civil rights cases. On the criminal side, we've done everything from DUI up to capital murder. And that broad base of experience gives us a lot of ideas for how to present different issues in a case. So what I'm going to talk about today is like Chris alluded to, is visual stories and how you can use visual stories to make a better case. And I'm going to come at it from sort of 3 different aspects. I'm going to talk a little bit about scanning and some of the benefits and problems when it comes to using that information. I'm going to talk about our use of SketchUp. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about accuracy, because it's an important part of whether these diagrams could be admissible in court. So let's start with the scanning. I first became aware of the possibilities of laser scanning going to different conferences, both for the ACSR, the Association of Crime Scene Reconstruction Professionals, as well as the IFSM group. So many of you may be familiar with those 2 organizations. And I saw some amazing stuff in the sessions that I attended. And I asked some of the presenters, hey, these are great scans you're putting together, and how are the attorneys using it? And I guess the answer that I received was, they don't know what to do with it. We send it to them and they don't know what to do with it. And that sort of was different than the experience I'd had to that point, creating digital models in SketchUp, where we did a lot of collaborative work with the attorneys and experts in the case. So I started to think about why is this a problem that these great point clouds are being generated and it's hard for people to use. Well, one of the problems is inherent in the technology. You've got just really large files. So here is a package we had from a particular case. Looks like we've got over 4 gigabytes of raw scans, and then there was it was packaged up in a web viewer. It was another sort of 3.6 gigabytes. So close to 8 gigs in total of this package. And if you think about moving that around to cloud storage for different parties, somebody might spend the better part of an afternoon trying to download it, and then they get it on their computer, and maybe it doesn't run because there's different different files. They're not compatible with other platforms. In theory, you'd have these packages that would run on any computer. In practice, our experience is it doesn't always work as well as it had been intended if people aren't keeping their software up to date, or there's different versions of browsers and softwares and whatnot. So the technology can be a big barrier to interoperability and collaboration amongst people on a team. The next thing I'd like to talk about is sort of an expertise gap. And I put this example up here of a CT scan. And if I was a radiologist, I'm sure I would know exactly what I was looking at right off the bat and be able to talk about it. But I'm not a radiologist. And I think people have the same experience when they see point clouds for the first time. If they're not used to working with them, it's confusing. There's lots of, it looks kind of like a picture from far away, and then you get in close and things are disintegrating into points, and you can see through walls, and you're seeing the outside but not the inside of things. So having a little context, and you can see here, we do this sort of thing all the time, is create context for complicated visuals or images, just helping people to know what they're looking at. Where is a slice taken? What am I seeing? Oh, it's a slice through a heart and the rib cage. Great. Now I can understand a little bit more about what the expert's talking about. And then the final thing that I think is a really an issue that we found working with point cloud data is this idea of storytelling. And how can we add to the data that was collected about a scene in a way that's going to help tell the story of the case? And it can be somewhat challenging in these different platforms to add in human figures, weapons, to show a sequence of events. And that's where we've been able to do quite a bit with SketchUp. And let me just see if I can, at this point, I've got a couple more slides here. This is from a capital murder case that we worked on. You can see here the digital model we built in SketchUp was actually based on a laser scan. And we were able to use that laser scan to measure some key points like the width of the hallway. And then I'll show you what the actual model looks like. You probably got a peek of this before in the background at the beginning of the webinar here. But let's look at this particular model. And what we're able to do with this SketchUp model is show a sequence of events. So, we've got this guy, this sort of teal colored guy who's holding up this family at gunpoint, trying to collect on some debts and a drug dealing gone bad. And you've got, the yellow guy comes back and says, I got rid of this guy's son. He's really upset. Orange guy gets really upset and confronts teal guy. And then ultimately you can sort of see here, he goes and reaches for the gun. Teal guy's holding it back away from him, kind of pushes him. And then there's a shot. Orange guy dies. Let's look at this from a different perspective. We'll go to the side view. And this is, again, one of the great things about a digital model, really easy to look at from different perspectives. So here's orange guy reaching for the gun, pushes teal guy into the doorway. There's a shot, and then orange guy goes down. And one of the great things about this tool is you can really get in and adjust things as needed. We were able to take this model and to visit with the defendant in custody and get a lot more information about exactly how he remembers coming to fire the weapon and how he impacted the door, and that influenced his pulling the trigger from his telling. So it's really a great tool to be able to make sure everyone's on the same page as far as what they can see, and what the scene looks like, but also what happened in the scene. And it's really easy to add things. You can, I'll cover that part later about moving people around. But let me move on to the next portion of the presentation here, and that is talking about how we use SketchUp. And I've got an article that I'm going to send afterwards. It's called Drawing to Learn, and it talks a lot about the philosophy, about how the tools that we've learned in the architecture industry and are commonly used in the architecture industry become actually really useful in the process of investigating crime scenes and understanding scenes. And in particular, I'm going to focus on a case where there was a killing in an apartment, again, probably a dispute over drugs. This one happened with a machete. And I'm going to talk a little bit and demonstrate how we ended up building this 3D model in a case where we didn't have a laser scan for this building. And I'm going to start by just talking a little bit about what types of resources we look for to go through that process. So the first thing here, we want to be able to see what the building looks like from the outside. For a lot of cities, you have Google Street View available. You can select from different dates, and you can see here we picked the June 2014 date, which is relatively close in time to when this incident occurred. You'll want to also look at aerial photographs of buildings, and I'm showing here a screenshot from a service called Nearmap. We have a subscription and use Nearmap quite a bit. The benefit of that service is they are a little bit higher resolution than what you can get sort of in your standard Google Maps search. And they also, in many urban areas, revisit or go back and photograph the same location more than once a year. So you can see here we were able to get aerial photo from a March date when there was no leaves on the trees, which makes it easier to see the full size of the roof. as opposed to having it be obscured by trees. And I will say that if you don't have access to Nearmap, that's fine. You can do a lot of the same things in terms of selecting different historical images and measuring them in Google Earth, which is something you can get both on the web and also by downloading a desktop app of Google called Google Earth Pro. But we use Nearmap when we can. It's available in most urban areas, and it is a little bit better in terms of the product for measuring and for accuracy of the aerial photographs. And then what else might you have in your crime scene investigation? Sometimes you end up with diagrams of an interior building. Here you can see one drawn by an investigator. It's not to scale, but at least it provides a good sense of what furniture was in the house and how it was laid out. And of course, you can have plenty of crime scene photographs. In this case, we were able to go back later after the crime scene had been cleaned up and visit. So we were able to take some measurements on scene, and we didn't have a lot of time, so this is pretty rough. But you got some basic interior measurements, and of course photographs of the unit, absent of all the clutter of the crime scene. So what do we do with all this stuff? I mean, having the measurements is great, but we don't always have measurements available to us. And in fact, we've been able to make 3D models of both interior and exterior locations without any measurements, and just relying on photographs that we have collected from the crime scene discovery, or from a visit ourselves, or oftentimes even just a real estate listing. But however we get those photographs, one of the things we're often trying to do is determine what can we learn from a photograph based on what we know about the size of real world objects. And I'm going to pause for just a second here, because I would like this to be something where we have a little bit of audience participation. And of course, you can type questions in any time, and Chris will interrupt me. But I'm going to ask people, you see here in this image, we've got a doorway. And the fact is that most doorways are about 6'8" or 80 inches tall. And that's a useful bit of information, because it might tell us some information about other sizes of things that appear in this image. But there's probably lots of other things people could think of that are common sizes that of something you might see in an image that would give you a clue about how big other things are. So I'm going to pause for a second to give myself a break from talking. And I know this is on a delay, so I'm going to ask people who may be listening, if you can think of other things you might have seen in a set of images of a house or whatnot that have common sizes that you could rely on to help you learn about other things that appear in those pictures. Go ahead and type it into the chat. I'm going to pause here for just a few seconds while you do that, and then I'll continue talking about what we're doing in this image.
Yeah, so while that's coming in, Josh, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about, or at least really touch on what you were able to do with just, a tape measure or a rough scene sketch, because there's a lot of times where our scenes, even especially cold cases, right, or cases that are a long time back, or maybe a scanner wasn't available, and we're still doing it today, scenes that this may not be that big of a scene where we're bringing out everything, but it still needs to be documented in some way. And then lo and behold, somebody dies later, or the scene now becomes a much bigger issue, where now we have to build models off of what we have, right? It's using your resources, not having the Cadillac of measurement devices, a laser scanner or something of that sort. Being able to visually tell that story using maybe less than optimal data sources, or less than pristine data sources to get that. I find that's really interesting and really applicable. While I was doing the job, a lot of times you're gonna have, man, this is all I've got from that is a rough sketch, but I still need to be able to tell that story, right? Be able to relate that information. And I think that's really neat how you guys are using this information to do that, to relate that story to the layperson.
Right. And even if we only had something like this not to scale sketch, we probably still know the dimensions of the building, because we can measure it from an aerial photograph. And we know something about the interior layout because we see windows, and windows obviously are going to go into rooms. and we know something about the furniture layout, and furniture often has common sizes. We know how big the average stove and refrigerator is. We know how big the average bed is. Does it mean we're going to be having really great guesses at every last little thing measurement? No, but oftentimes giving it your best shot and then putting everything into a 3D model can be extremely instructive. In terms of this image, what we're doing here is looking at, okay, well, if we know the height of the door, because that's very likely to be 80 inches, what can we say about the height of this window? And if it was a precisely 90-degree angle straight on elevation view, we could just look at the two relative sizes of these arrows. And I could say, okay, well, this arrow is 682 pixels, and this arrow is 604 pixels. And I'm going to do a straight ratio and find out that if the 682 pixels is 80 inches, 604 pixels is X. But this is not an image that is straight on. There's perspective. And so in this sense, we can still learn what this length is, but we have to apply that perspective. And the question is, if we know that in this sense, 682 pixels is 100% of 80 inches, 684, but not. Here, what we're going to do is we're going to find out what's the length at that location to this known perspective line. And that's going to be up to like 822 pixels or so. And then I'm going to find out what percentage of, so if 822 pixels is equal to 80 inches, then what's now this other dimension?
And that's a lot of math. So some of the comments that come in are fantastic. One of them, and you hit it on, was appliances, right? There's, your standard refrigerator is.
As you go through this list, I'm going to add it to this. I'm going to add it to this little page here so we can capture these for future viewers in the notes. Yeah. So appliances. So that's going to be, fridge, stove. And what else you got here?
Oh man, we got toilets. There's kind of some common sizes definitely common sizes there. Countertops, that's another good one. There's kind of a standard countertop height.
Yep.
Light switches, we know we can get definitely between the screws or the trim screws on light switches. Those are extremely standardized sizes.
Yep.
Yeah, just some, really. Yeah, when you think about it, this is something I didn't think about, of how many things are just common sizes. Right. They're industry standard. Borrowing that from, like you said, architecture, I think we have a lot to learn from the building side of things, that things are kind of standard dimensions.
Okay, and I'm going to give you a few more here. Doors, probably 80 inches high. But then also in terms of width, there's really common widths. You oftentimes have a 24-inch, 20 or a 30-inch, or 36-inch wide for residential. Sometimes you get a little bit wider for commercial.
And especially like exterior doors, right? Those are almost always 36 inches, unless it's, a back door or something that's really old. Most of those are 36, right?
Right. So 36 would be real common for an exterior door. 30 is really common for interior. Sometimes you get 24 for a really small bathroom or for a closet, a linen closet or whatnot. And then you get other stuff too. But for the typical doors, these are the most common. Wall thickness is often going to be 6 inches exterior on residential, and 5 inches or 4.5 to 5 inches interior. And then hallways, very typical, 36 inches, sometimes a little more or less.
And you'll always find the less when you're trying to haul a dryer down the hall to the back laundry room, right?
So bed sizes, twin, double. You can look up dimensions of these online. Bricks, in particular, like a concrete masonry unit is going to be usually 8 inches by 16 inches. So that's a few normal ones that we deal with a lot, and just look for those things, and then you can help. That'll help you sort of develop the model. So let me just like do a quick demo on how to put all this together, and I'm going to switch over to SketchUp, and you can see in this sort of blank file, I've imported this aerial photograph from Nearmap. I've already taken the step of scaling the largest dimension I had, which was the roof. So 66 feet. And then in terms of how I would start a model like this, I mean, the easiest first thing to do is to model the roof. So we can make a square there, model that roof. We're going to give it a pitch. And then, of course, roofs have thicknesses. So we're going to go ahead and put we'll give it a 3-inch, maybe a 6-inch thickness, just so it actually stands out a bit. Okay, so here's our roof. And then the other thing we need to know is, and I'm just going to kind of get this out of the way for the moment. We'll move it up just to make it out of the way. I'll move it up 30 feet, but we can put it back down later. And then as far as the walls for this thing, what we need to know is, hold on a second, I'm going to take a rectangle from here to there. We'll move this thing down to the ground. Oops. There we go. I'm just going to do this the old-fashioned way here. One of the things about SketchUp is if you don't group things right, they get a little bit, they get stick to each other. So this is, I'm going to need to make walls for this thing. And in order to do that, I'm going to go ahead and turn the aerial photograph off, which I've sort of tagged so we can get rid of that. And then this has do you remember this building has some eaves, and I'm going to take a quick look at those things here. We got a view from the street. We can see we've got the eaves here. So we have to account for the fact that it's got eaves, and that means the walls are going to be smaller than the roof. I'm going to say the eaves are going to be 2 feet. So we're going to offset the wall in 2 feet, and then get rid of the that. So now this is going to be our wall, and the wall is going to be 6 inches thick, and we'll go ahead and pull that up to 8 feet tall. And then this building has 4 units in it. So we're going to need to sort of split this exterior volume into 4 parts. Let's make this separation wall 6 inches thick. And we'll move it so that it's exactly in the center. We'll move it 3 inches and pull that up 8 feet. So this is the partition wall. And then there's another, let me just make these guys into a group. There's another wall that's going to separate the other units, and we're going to be modeling this one in the back here. So let's go back here and put another separation wall here. And I'm just gonna, I don't really know for sure where the separation wall is yet. So I'm just gonna pull it up here, and then we can move that around later as we figure it out. Okay. So the next thing we do is put in the door and window, and we'll do that here real quick. So we know the door is probably 80 inches by 36. So let's go ahead and do that. So 36 by 80, and we can move that around. And here's where I would consult my measurements. And I'm going to abbreviate some of this just so we can get on with the rest of the presentation. But you can sort of see, I've got some measurements that we took on site that it tells us, okay, we've got a window and a door. This is from inside, and we've got the position of the window and the door here. Yeah, so we know here where the door and the window is in relation to this wall. And I'm going to go back in here into our SketchUp model, and I'm going to say, okay, there's a window here, maybe about like that, and the door. And I didn't actually get this in the right group, so let's put that in the right group. So now we can put the door through. Window. And then we need there's a wall here, and these interior walls are going to be 5 inches wide. So let's just say this is 5 inches by 14 feet, and bring that up to the. And of course, if I was doing this more carefully, I would have gotten the dimensions from my measurements. We'll just do one more here. There's a wall right in this area. And this is going to be, we'll call it 8 feet. And that one's going to go up to the ceiling as well. So you can see this is all coming together. We've got the bathroom back here, the bedroom here. Here's the kitchen. Here's the living room. And I'm just going to switch over now. I'm going to save this so we can use it later if necessary. And I'll go ahead and publish this onto Trimble Connect too, so that Chris can get to it later as needed. But go ahead and see here. Save to Trimble Connect. We're going to put that here. Replace it. And then I'm going to switch over to the finished version of this, so you can sort of see how this unit came out when we did a more careful version of this. Again, just with hand measurements. And you can see that we have right here a finished version of this model. And we've got all the furniture in here that we've sourced from the 3D warehouse and modified as necessary. Some closets. And most importantly, the people. And you can see how we use this is to tell the story of the sequence of events. So it started with a couple of residents of the house, this guy, the orange guy and the blue guy. They're inside. Some people come to the door. He opens it. They barge in. They're going to confront the blue guy, but one guy goes over and holds the orange guy at gunpoint while the other two take blue guy into the bedroom. They start getting in a fight. This guy pulls the machete out. Then blue guy bolts, and they chase him, and they corner him in the living room. This guy comes away from orange guy, pistol whips blue guy, and then says to this other guy, all right, take care of him. And so they go after him with a machete, and he's now mortally wounded. These guys take off, and orange guy takes off too, and here's where the police find him. So you can see that, this was a way for the attorneys to get a handle on what was happening in the case and make sure everyone was on the same page about what would happen, and also to test, sort of ideas about what a person could have feasibly have seen from their position. So, for example, if we talk about there was a confrontation in the bedroom, is anyone over here going to be able to see what that confrontation was about? And we can kind of get in here and look at, what was this guy's view who was being held at gunpoint? What was this guy's view who was doing the holding at gunpoint? And we can even, if necessary, put a camera right at that person's eye position the camera, and say, okay, from here, what are you going to be able to see? From here, you could probably see orange guy, but not so much about what's going on in the bedroom. You'd have to be all the way over into the kitchen, and that even wouldn't work. All right, so that's a good stopping point for that project. I'm going to switch back over to the slides, and in a minute, I'm going to start talking about admissibility. But I'll just pause for a second and see, Chris, if there's anything that came in on questions that we need to address.
Yeah, don't have any questions coming in. I think that's really interesting that how you're positioning the people and the avatars and just giving them solid colors, right? We're not giving them freckles or, glasses based upon this person was supposedly there. This person was wearing glasses. We're not giving them hair that moves in the wind, right? We're giving them rather nondescript looks. And why is that?
All right. So I'm glad you brought that up. So a couple things. Number one, as far as moving these folks around, you're seeing the sort of the finished version of this, but in order to have this be really useful, we need to be able to move these things fairly easily, and also ideally in real time during conversations that we're having with the team, or even perhaps one of the witnesses. So one of the things we can do is turn on this layer for the handles, and you can see all these little reference points appear on each figure. And then we can drill down into each one and actually select that individual limb and move it around as needed in real time. This is not quite as robust as having what I call a rigged human figure, where you actually have a skeleton inside and you can adjust the position of that skeleton, and then the skin of the figure moves in order to respect those movements. And but it's much easier to do in real time, and most important for us, it works in SketchUp, where SketchUp does not support rigged human figures. You'd have to go to a more robust modeling platform like Blender or 3D Studio Max in order to get that functionality. So that's one thing we can do as far as moving the people around in real time. The other thing that's really important to do is, our philosophy has always been try to keep the diagrams as simple as possible. So you can see we've used color coding to help differentiate and track people's location between scenes. So we can assign kind of an identity to each one of these figures. We can easily scale them for height as well. You can see here, if this person is, let's say this person is 6'1" right now, but if I learn actually he's only 5'7", we can go ahead and scale that figure a little bit as necessary to make that change. But what we don't do is we don't try to add facial features. We don't add body mass changes, hair, clothing. And there's a reason for that, and it's twofold. One is that it's actually quite challenging to make those items look realistic. And people are very good at spotting sort of human elements in an image that look unrealistic, and you quickly get into this area that's often called the uncanny valley, where something looks kind of creepy because it doesn't look very realistic. So we're trying to stay away from that by actually making them humanoid, but not adding details that might look uncanny and therefore be distracting to the viewer. And then the other reason we don't add those features is we often don't have good foundation for what they would be. Like, how do we know what the hair would look like that night? How do we know what clothing they were wearing that night, or what it looked like on their body? How do we know what their body mass and exact proportions of their muscles and weight are? And it's oftentimes that people will ask us, "Oh, this person was overweight. Can you make them look overweight?" And what we just say is it's not a good plan, unless we have a scan of them to like really understand precisely how their body mass is distributed. Then we're guessing, and that's going to be something that's less likely to be admissible in court if it were to come to that. So we just try to have these human figures be there to help people understand what happened, and less about trying to be an exact replica of the person in the scene. So
yeah, because it's all about where do we spend our time, right? We only have a certain amount of time. Where do we spend it? Do we spend it, making hair and eyes that are the exact color, or do we spend it relaying the sequence of events and how the event unfolded? Right. Where do we put our time, right?
So that's kind of a good segue into admissibility, because while it's not always the case that you have to have everything be, precise at the beginning, and in fact, we often suggest working with whatever you've got at the beginning, even if you don't have a laser scan, work with what you have. But ultimately, if you're going to go to court, you need to be thinking about how a judge might rule on admissibility. And the key things are going to be, is it relevant to the case? Is it accurate? And is it fair? As opposed to not presenting things in a prejudicial way. And I want to focus in on this accuracy thing, because it's one of the most often comes up with the kind of work that we're doing here that is not necessarily an exact replica or an exact laser scan of the scene. Is, how do we know that the reconstruction that we're doing is accurate? And one of the things I start to ask, I always talk about first, is that I get this question sometimes, well, how do you know this is exactly right? And the thing I want to always impart to people is there's really no such thing as exact. It does not exist in the world of measurement, because there's always some level of uncertainty with any measurement device. And it's really important to understand what that is and think about how it impacts what you're trying to do. So you can see here, like here's on the lower left, a little laser measuring device you could use to measure the distance between walls. It's reading out in 30 seconds of an inch. Is it really that accurate? I mean, in theory, yes, but in practice, you're probably not that steady holding it, and you're moving it side to side slightly, and it's probably less accurate than a 32nd of an inch. But maybe it's a 16th of an inch accurate. That's kind of what you'd get the tape measure to. And then you have other devices to survey that could, in theory, be more accurate. But the second question is, how are you using that information in terms of what's the underlying accuracy of what you're measuring? And I think this is sort of my best shot at an admissibility checklist as we do our work. So the first thing is, are we using the best information available? And sometimes we have a laser scan, and if so, we'll use it. And sometimes we don't. And then we'd say, well, what's the next best thing that we have? Maybe we can get hand measurements. If not, maybe we have measurements from the scene that we can combine with known things from known sizes to do the best we can. Even if we don't have any interior pictures at all, like we modeled a single wide trailer the other day, and we only had exterior pictures, but we had an idea what single wide trailer layouts are typically. We could see the windows into the various rooms that gave us a clue as to where they are. We might not have the dimensions exactly, but it was still useful as a investigative tool to work with the witness about explaining where things were, because pictures are always going to be more descriptive than just trying to explain things in words. Second thing on the checklist is, what's our basis to know the location of movable objects? And sometimes we have security camera footage that we can look at landmarks in that footage that are at a known location that are measurable on a aerial photograph or whatnot, and then look at the position of different people or vehicles in relation to those landmarks, and that can provide a pretty reliable location of where people were. We did a case where there was a fight outside a bar, and we're able to identify locations of people fairly closely just by looking at sidewalk cracks and markings in the parking lot that were measurable on an aerial photograph. And Joshua, the final and most important question to answer is, is the accuracy that you see in the 3D model sufficient to answer the question that's being posed? And I think that I'm going to get to that with this next example. And let's just kind of go through this particular case. It was a situation where somebody was having a mental crisis, is up in the attic of their house, and started firing a rifle out both sides of the attic. We had bullet strikes on several houses, but in one, which is the upper left here, there was a person injured by a bullet going through the door of their house. So what we were able to do in creating this 3D model is map out the location of the bullet strikes inside the attic and look at kind of how those bullet strikes ended up on the house across the way. Here you can see that house. And there was all these strikes were recorded on the siding. And you can see them identified here with these little yellow markers. And then most importantly, you know, was this person who was charged with attempted murder able to be aware that there was a person in that house and target them? And that's where we were able to like look at the scenario, look at what the view through the window was into the only portion of the front facade of that house across the way that was see-through, which is the upper portion of that window that you see there in the distance, and identify what that field of view was and compare it with the witness statement of how they came to be in the position behind the door where they got shot. And so you can see from this Cohen field of view that there really wasn't any way that this person in the attic was even close to being able to see that person's position coming down the hall and target them. So that's where I feel like if you were asking in this case, if there was a person at the sink in the kitchen, you know, were they inside of the field of view or outside of the field of view? Maybe we wouldn't be able to tell for certainty, because if we're off by 6 inches on our window position, which is sort of the limits of what the way we were using at the beginning of this case, just looking at modeling, making a model from pictures, you know, we might not be able to tell for sure if the person standing at the sink in the kitchen was inside or outside of the cone of field of view. But because the witness statement is that they were coming down the hallway to the door when they got shot, the answer is we are able to give a definitive answer to the question because we're well outside of the margin of error. And I'm going to just give a quick view of that model, just so you can sort of see what that looks like in SketchUp.
Joshua, while you're opening that up, I had a question come in. Do you use the layout feature of SketchUp with your 3D models? You know, taking them from SketchUp 3D over into layout, or do you just find using SketchUp in the 3D model, using it in 3D to be easier or better?
So SketchUp has a feature, you know, a program called Layout that's existed for quite some time, and it's primarily designed to create two-dimensional page layouts from a 3D model. And it's akin to what you might do in AutoCAD, where you have a model space, and then you can create a paper space with viewports to the model that allow you to set up, you know, sort of scale drawings on a particular size of paper. And that's really useful for architectural projects. You know, you're going to go to print on a certain size of paper for your plan set. You know, you want to have one that's scaled at 1/8 scale or, you know, 1/4 scale or whatnot. And you can set that all up and print it to the accurate dimension. We don't often create things that are, you know, particularly these sort of 3D perspective views where a scaled, a measurable scale is meaningful. And so for that reason, we don't tend to do many sort of typical drawing sets at a particular scale. Instead, we're often making presentations where we're exporting a series of images from the 3D model and then putting them into a PowerPoint, or like the slides I was showing you today. And if there was a feature in layout that sort of streamlined the production of viewports into like a, you know, a PowerPoint export, we would probably use that. But there's not. So what we tend to do instead is export a series of images and then just quickly drop those in to PowerPoint slides, or make a poster board, or a PDF or whatnot. But yeah, we don't use layout too much. What we have used in the past a little bit is we've used SketchUp Studio, which allows importing of point clouds. And in this particular case, we did a version of the model just from photographs and information recorded, and a few measurements that were recorded for the bullet strikes by the investigating officers. And then we came back like 6 months later when we actually were able to get a copy of the laser scan in Discovery and updated the model to include that more accurate information. And it did result in a slight change to the facade of this house. In our original model, we had gotten the shape of this roof a little bit wrong. And when I say a little bit wrong, it might have been off by a foot or so, and in a direction. We had better terrain information for the site, so we could see like what was the relative elevation of this house to this house. So all that, it matters, but it didn't matter to the question that we were trying to resolve, which was what could you see from this attic into this house. And I knew that going in, that whatever changes we might have by getting more accurate information, it wasn't going to change the answer to the question. So I think that's a good place to sort of move into our beginning of our wrap up here. And this is a question I want to spend a little time, because I think most attorneys, and I don't know, we'll see if any of the other folks on this call who are crime scene investigators or whatnot have a similar experience. But in my experience, a lot of attorneys don't think very much about exhibits or visuals until they realize they're going to court, which is, of course, a tricky time to start creating all this stuff, because it ends up in a lot of really quick preparation of graphics right before a trial. And what we suggest is to take a different approach, and that is to think about the production of visuals as you would any other expert that might get hired to work on a case, and bring them in early. Think about what things you might want to do very early in the case to provide value and usefulness to the entire team as time goes on. And then ideally, you use that material to get it settled before they have to go to court. And then you end up not having to go through that very expensive preparation and last minute fire drill to get the trial exhibits ready. And then maybe the last thing I will kind of point out before moving into Q&A is that we rarely are working alone on cases like this. Almost always you're going to have officers and investigators working together as a team to collect information at the site. They have to collaborate with the DA and other paralegals in that office, and perhaps experts. You're probably going to have to switch, send information back and forth in Discovery. And what ends up happening is people oftentimes get kind of siloed, and they get their own view of the case, but are not necessarily understanding the big picture. But using a tool like a 3D model early in a case to develop that visual story, it really helps everybody see the big picture, and ideally work to resolve the case before trial. But if you're still going to trial, you know that you're going to be really well prepared, and there's no better feeling than going into trial knowing that you're really well prepared to testify or to win the case for your team. So let me sort of call it quits there for the prepared slides. I'd be happy to take Q&A or other questions you might have, Chris. I've got those models I can certainly bring up and look at different issues if you have questions or want to see more.
I guess it helps if I unmute myself. Okay. Yeah, so as those questions come in, those of you in the audience on YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn, if you have questions, please post them in the chat. Josh, if you just want to leave your screen up there just in case something comes in on one of your models. Had a question with Reveal. So somebody said in Reveal we can pull out trajectories. So with Reveal you can import your laser scan data. You can pick points on the point cloud and then draw out a cone of possibility. From that LiDAR scan data or a vehicle. Do you use SketchUp Studio with the ability to import point clouds and those things? Do you use that the same way of being able to pick points on a point cloud and then come up with answers to where was this point shot? Or where was this, where did this shot likely come from?
So I am not aware of a specific sort of trajectory tool in SketchUp Studio. We often use SketchUp Studio to sort of provide immediate feedback on 3D models that we're making in SketchUp, because we can then register, bring in the point cloud and turn it on and off and get really good feedback about, hey, am I making the window the right size per this 3D, do I need to make all these individual bullet strikes in SketchUp, or do I want to just turn on the point cloud and do a quick test here? You can see I took a line from strike C and we brought that back to the rifle. And in certain cases where it was really important to do so, we actually set up a situation where we could move, connect this trajectory to something on the weapon. And then as we move this person around, you can sort of, the trajectory moves with that person in order to see how that impacts other things that might have been in the way of the trajectory. What's possible? And we've drawn cones. So all that's possible to do in SketchUp. There's just no sort of tool that is set up to do that out of the box. And then, of course, we're not simulating an actual bullet trajectory here. We're just modeling it as a straight line, which is often good enough for a short range shot. But for something this long range, you might want to have a ballistics expert that had software that is able to simulate the actual parabola of a trajectory based on the likely exit velocity for that particular weapon. And all that certainly is something that could come into play with a ballistics expert. When we create exhibits for cases, when we work and collaborate with the ballistics experts, they are providing information to us or guidance as to what they want to see in those exhibits, so that when they testify in court, they can say that the exhibits were created at their direction. And I don't think there's anything else I wanted to say about bullet trajectories. It'll come to me later. What else you've got in the meantime, Chris?
We don't have any other questions. Again, you guys, if you get a chance, now would be, here we go. Just had another one come in. Have you done any modeling or animation showing, say, over a timeline, injuries sustained to a body? So like an abuse homicide case using a skeletal model, or just a skeletal model in general showing injuries. So have you done any modeling or animations, showing that timeline of events or things like that?
So I don't know if we've done a case where we specifically were asked to build out injuries and how they occurred sequentially in a timeline. But what's actually somewhat common is when we are working on cases that involve a forensic expert or a ballistics expert offering an opinion about how a set of injuries would have been likely to have been caused, given the facts in the case. And we can actually map injuries onto human figures. This particular model doesn't have them, but we have little marks that are similar to these bullet strike marks that we can place inside of these sort of human components on an arm or a leg or a neck, in such a way that as we move this human figure, the injury moves with the arm or the leg or the neck. And that can be a really useful tool when we're collaborating with a forensics expert, so they can sort of see how different poses of this figure would potentially be connected with the sequence of events or the injuries that might have occurred. So if we think one particular set of in and out, injury for a bullet trajectory was the first one, we might place the human figure in a position that would allow them to receive that injury from a particular shot. So if, for example, let's take off the roof on this particular building. And if we had mapped injuries onto this figure, and there was more than one, maybe we'd say, okay, well, the first one was when she was facing the door and she received front to back injury, and we'd map that on there and connect it with a trajectory. And then maybe she, turned away and received a second injury sort of in the side of the hip. And then we'd have that one connected to another trajectory. And so, basically what we can then do, and you saw this in this other model where we had sort of sequenced a series of movements. Let me pull this back up here. So we can go through and understand the event sequence through a series of still frames. We're not trying to create a movie, like a 30 frame per second animation. We oftentimes wouldn't have the foundation for exactly how someone moved their body. We're just trying to create enough frames to tell the story. And so with the example that you're giving of like, what order did the injuries occur in? We would maybe just have one frame for each shot and show them in sequence, and then be able to explain this is the opinion of the expert or the finding of the investigators, the criminal investigators. And it's a really great starting point to have that discussion with all the stakeholders to the case.
Awesome. All right. Well, haven't had any other questions come in, and we are at top of the hour. Joshua, do you have anything else that we didn't cover that you wanted to cover? I found this incredibly fascinating. I wish we had more time with you. We need to get together a little bit more often, because I found this incredibly fascinating to be able to tell those visual stories in the clear and concise way that you do it. It's really neat.
Well, I appreciate that, Chris. And I guess what I would say is we don't have much more time right now, but we try to make ourselves available to anyone who has questions about a case they're working on and might be interested in thinking about how to use visual tools to do a better job of enhancing collaboration and presenting their case in a hearing or trial. So I encourage anyone who wants to talk more to just reach out and give us a call. We do offer consultations that are confidential and free of charge. And we're happy to, once we run a conflict check and make sure that we don't have any reasons why we can't discuss a case with you, then we just set up a meeting, probably a Zoom meeting, and just spend 30 minutes going through the story of the case and suggest some ways that might be good options for using visual tools. So yeah, I'd love to talk to people more, and feel free to reach out. You can find our website at fatpencilstudio.com, or the phone number up here on screen as well, 503-465-4533. That works too.
Awesome. Well, again, thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate you coming on. As always, you are just an absolute wealth of knowledge. I love having you, love talking to you. Just again, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. Pleasure to be with you.
All right. Thank you. And everybody, we're going to be back again next week. Some of the photo modeling that Joshua was talking about, using a drone shot or using street view, or even shots from a DSLR or a mirrorless camera, or even a cell phone, how to do photo modeling from just photographs. That's going to be coming up in later episodes of our series. So definitely want to check back in. All right. That brings us up to the end of the show. If you have any questions about it, please feel free to comment on the videos or the live streams that are on our social media channels. And we look forward to seeing you again here next week. We'll be back again next Wednesday doing cosmetic stripes and things like that on vehicles, which will be it'll be a lot of fun adding stripes to vehicles and pinstripes and that kind of thing. So, all right, with that, we're going to close it out. Again, thank you all for coming. Joshua, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. See ya.